Well, we've been everywhere today. We started out in California, and then we went to Russia and Eastern Europe, and I'm going to end with a personal story, and in case you didn't figure it out, I'm a Yankee. So I'm sure this is a story you haven't heard. I call it hometown. I was born in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and I haven't lived there for 50 years, but I want to be buried there. In 1740s, the Moravians, they were a religious sect that was part Pilgrim and part Amish, made a settlement on the north side of the Lehigh River. The settlement was surrounded by Indians, and it was threatened that the Indians would attack. But it happened to be Christmas Eve, and the Moravians had a tradition that on Christmas Eve they would go outside and blow their trumpets. And they did it, Indians or not. Well, the noise of the trumpet was something the Indians had never heard. It scared them, and they ran away. In honor of being saved on Christmas Eve, they named the settlement Bethlehem. On the south side of the river, about 100 years later, a steel mill was built, probably to make railroad tracks. But the steel mill grew and it grew and it grew until it was about 3 miles long and became the second largest steel mill in the United States, Bethlehem Steel Company. They were responsible for the Golden Gate Bridge, the Chrysler Building, the Holland and Lincoln tunnels, and most of the warships and aircraft carriers that helped us win the war. But I'm getting ahead of myself. In the early 1900s, word reached Eastern Europe and Southern Europe that there was work in Pennsylvania. And immigrants from Eastern Europe and Southern Europe, from Poland and Russia and Czechoslovakia and Austria, Romania, Greece, if I forgot anybody, made their way to Bethlehem PA, and my grandparents were among them. Now, all these people had some things in common. Mostly they were all young. My grandparents were teenagers. And they didn't come with their mom and dad. They came alone or with a friend. And mostly they came because they lived on farms, and there were too many children on the farm to make a living. And that's the second thing they had in common. I hope you get this. This is a joke. They were all Catholic. You know, Catholics and birth control. And there was a lot of political unrest in that part of the country. So they made their way to Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. And when they got there, even with all this in common, there was one thing they didn't have in common, and that was language. So naturally, they set out to find people who spoke their language. And Bethlehem, that section that I'm talking about, was only about 3 miles by 1 mile, and you had these little pockets of Greeks over here, Romanians here, Czechs here, Slavs there. And my grandmother told me that she lived in a house with 3 other families. All the able-bodied men and boys went to the steel to work, and all the able-bodied women went to the silk mills. My grandmother stayed home and watched all the kids. And I think that's why my grandmother never got to speak English very well, because she never left the home. So you would think that the first goal would be to get your own house. Well, it wasn't. The first goal that my grandmother and my grandfather and I'm going to call them Slovenians, did was build a church. And I'm not talking about a little clapboard church or even a brick church. I'm talking about a church made out of big pieces of granite, churches that had steeples and bell towers and stained glass windows, because the church was the keeper of their culture. The church was the place that you could go, hear your own language, sing your songs, do your dances, eat your food. If you were a young man who was over here by yourself, you could go there and get some of your mom's strudel or something that tastes like it. And by the way, the Bethlehem Steel had no insurance back in the day. It was very easy to get burned or lose a finger, or break a leg. The church was the only place you could go for help. And they went so far, because they all spoke these different languages, to build a school. So my grandparents built St. Joseph's. Well, the Slovaks built St. Cyril and Methodius. The Germans built Holy Ghost. There was a Greek Catholic church, there was a Russian Orthodox church, there was an Italian church. You name it, we had it. And Bethlehem became known as the town that had a church and a bar on every corner. So eventually my grandparents did get their own home, and along came their children, my father. My father was the next generation, a whole different set of goals, because he was born in the USA. He didn't care about eating strudel. He wanted to play baseball and eat hot dogs, and he was making money hand over fist. By now, the Bethlehem Steel was employing 33,000 people. My father got 15 weeks vacation. My girlfriend in high school was a secretary. Her second year, she got 15 weeks vacation. My father could run another business besides doing his job. Well, his goal, two things: buy a house and send your kids to college. He found a house. It was a really nice house. It had a big kitchen. It had a yard. It wasn't like the row homes down where his parents lived, where, you know, you had to wipe the steel dust off the chairs, and the backyard was a postage stamp. My mother could cook whatever she wanted. She could have friends in and relatives in. She could play her polka music at lunchtime. That's how it was. But wait a minute. What about the church? The church was 3 miles down there in town. We don't have a church. Well, that was okay. We had a church down the street. It was an Irish church. But the Irish got there early. They were already on their second church. And they built their second church in the suburbs. And the school, they taught in English. The Steel had insurance now. Well, it wasn't that important. We'll just go to the Irish church and send your kids to college. Came time for my wedding. I got married in the church, but now you rented a hall. I had 400 people at my wedding. And we had a family style, probably chicken and beef and potatoes and holupkis. Mm-hmm. And we had whiskey and beer. My husband and I had a big fight because his sister married somebody who worked for DuPont, and they drank martinis, and I said, no, we can't do that. And we danced, and then I had a big fight with my mother about the music, because I wanted somebody who could play rock music, and she wanted somebody who could play polka music, and I lost. And about the only thing I got to say about my wedding was the color of the bridesmaids' dresses. But everybody had a really good time. I mean, there were babies there and everybody, and about the only people who maybe didn't have the best time were my 20 friends from college who were sitting there looking like, what the heck is going on? Well, my husband and I, my husband was third generation Bethlehem Steel, and he had gone to college. We were going to be rich because my husband was an engineer. He wore a shirt and a tie to work every day. His parents were so proud, you just couldn't believe it. Well, we didn't get rich because in the 60s, the steel started to decline. And there's a whole lot of history about that for many, many reasons. And we were the lucky ones, the ones who went to college. Now I'm going to backtrack just a little bit. My father didn't finish high school because if you started in the steel at 16, you had 2 years seniority on everybody else, which meant you were in line for the better jobs. And there was no other place to work, so why not? But in the 60s, Bethlehem got hit really, really hard. And I've forgotten right now, but I think of the year that they went bankrupt. Left a lot of people high and dry. Well, what happened to my town, my hometown? It came back. The city fathers turned that steel, 3 miles of steel, into a venue where there's ice hockey, there's restaurants, there's music, there's a casino. Oh yeah, a radio station. Every weekend there's a wine fest or a farmer's market or, oh, and of course there's the music fest that you may have heard of. It's a huge draw. And now we still have immigrants coming from the other side of the ocean, the Pacific Ocean, to live in those same houses that my grandparents lived in, because they're coming to work in the casino, in the restaurants, and the places that are now there. And I'm happy because it's back. And I'm very proud of my hometown. Thank you.